I had just stepped out of the bathroom when my phone rang. Quickly, I wrapped myself in a towel and hurried to the bedroom. Tiffany was already heading out to do her Christmas shopping, and we had planned to meet up later. Before saying goodbye, I heard a male voice. "Hello, Tiffany. Do we have a chance to meet today to be together?" "Who are you talking to?" I said furiously. There was a brief pause, then 2 or 3 seconds of complete silence, and then the phone hung up. Startled, I looked at the cell phone. That's when I realized it was Tiffany's phone, not mine. They were the same model, except mine had some cracks on the screen, and I was holding Tiffany's phone in my hands. Surely she must have swapped phones, but who would call to let me know? My God, was she really cheating on me, I thought. I returned to the bathroom and dried myself off, while my thoughts became muddled. I couldn't make sense of what was happening. Tiffany and I have been married for 6 years, and I never suspected anything. We don't have children, at least not yet as we've agreed upon. And of course she still loved me, but her interest in me had almost disappeared. Our sex life, which used to be 2 or 3 times a week, sometimes when she initiated, dropped to once or twice a month, always at my insistence. When we made love, she was apathetic and unenthusiastic, as if she were on autopilot, not the same Tiffany from the beginning of our relationship. Of course, we talked about this issue again and again. Tiffany kept saying there was nothing special about it, that she was just tired, too busy with work, blah, blah, blah. But nothing changed at her job. No major projects, no overtime, no promotion. Every time I brought up the issue, Tiffany would respond that she felt better, and sometimes we would make love that night. But soon enough, everything went back to the same. I asked, and she denied. By the end of October, I decided to put an end to it. And that night after dinner, I sat her down on the bed and said, "Tiffany, I love you, but I'm not ready to continue like this. I don't want to spend the rest of my life without love. You used to enjoy having sex with me, but obviously not anymore. Something has to change, or else I'm going to ask for a divorce." She looked at me, completely incredulous. "Divorce? Isn't that too radical, Tiffany? Do you realize how bad this is?" I decided to find out. We've had sex 3 times in the last 3 months. That's since July 1st. I'm not going to live like this anymore. She looked down at her feet, clearly uncomfortable. She looked at me and I continued. "First of all, I want you to go to Dr. John and get a complete checkup to make sure there are no physical problems. And secondly, I want us to start couples therapy." "Couples therapy? But we haven't done anything wrong," she said. And I said without hesitation, "Are you listening to me, Tiffany? We're practically living together like brother and sister. Whether you want to admit it or not, something is wrong. And we're going to try to fix it, or I'm going to leave." There was a long discussion, Tiffany cried, but I stood firm on my conditions. She met with Dr. John, who confirmed she was perfectly healthy. And we started going once a week to James Carter, a therapist recommended by our friends Teddy and Alice. We consulted for about 3 months, and everything seemed to be going well, or so it seemed to me. We talked a lot about our relationship, each other's work, the families we grew up in, and what our parents' houses were like. Some of it seemed good or inappropriate, but James was sure we were making progress, even if our sex life hadn't improved. So far, we've talked more about relationships and getting out of bed than making love. James's advice to me was to be patient and for both of us to be honest with ourselves and our partner. Now, sitting in the room and looking at Tiffany's phone as if a cat had jumped out of it, I was pondering, did I just uncover the real reason why she no longer wants to sleep with me? Is it really that simple? Have I been replaced? Has someone else come along and taken on the role of the traditional husband? From what I could tell, nothing had changed in Tiffany's schedule. She hadn't been late from work, hadn't gone on mysterious shopping trips, hadn't dined with friends, hadn't come home confused and bothered, and hadn't immediately rushed to the bathtub. But that doesn't mean she hasn't slept with someone else. She just did it carefully. I picked up the phone and checked the received calls, and to my surprise, there was only one call. The call I had just answered. The caller was identified as VP. I pressed replay and waited for the signal. To my surprise, the guy didn't pick up the phone, and the call went to voicemail. "This is Victor Papa. Please leave your message and I'll get back to you soon. Have a good day." I dialed the number. I recognized the name. He was another employee at the marketing firm where Tiffany worked, but in a different department. She had mentioned him a few times, but I had never met him. I scrutinized Tiffany's phone carefully. Not only were all the received calls before deleted, but also the lists of missed and outgoing calls. Why did she do this? Tiffany was obviously hiding her affairs. I went to the workshop and looked at the phone bills and home phone records for the past few months. Tiffany was paying the bills, so I hadn't had a reason to look at them. I found all the bills for the home phone on the table, but the search didn't reveal any calls from Victor Papa, at least not from his cell phone, but there were no records of cell phone calls for the past 5 months. I looked at the contact card. All the cell phone bills had been paid, so Tiffany must have hidden them. No doubt, because they listed calls to Victor Papa. I arrived at Tiffany's workplace about 30 minutes early. Her car was not yet in the parking lot, so I sat and thought for a while. If Tiffany cheated on me with Victor Papa or someone else, our marriage was over. She may love me, but it's not worth it. I suppose if she ever loved me, why would she want to be with me? Why go to couples therapy? If she thought she could get away with it, she would find out she was completely wrong. At first, I thought I was going to find Tiffany at work today, tell her about the contents of Victor's call, and demand an explanation. But I realized that wasn't enough. I needed evidence. And then I wanted to effectively end our marriage by rubbing the evidence in her face. I was furious and hurt, and she had to pay for what she did to me. And I had a much better place for our final encounter than Tiffany's workplace. So I walked in there, and after a while she showed up, kissed me, and we went into a meeting. James began talking about common sense in how we handle arguments in our relationship, and if the difference in styles is based on our experiences, how our parents argued, and so on. Tiffany seemed thoughtful and serious, trying to give plausible answers, and I managed to avoid showing too much discomfort. That conniving woman. I wanted to grab her by the throat and strangle her in front of James. At the end of the session, James gave me the opportunity to find a good reason to forgive her, even if just a little. He said something like, "I know it's difficult for both of you, but we're beginning to learn about your marriage, what each of you expects from it, and your honesty creates an atmosphere where we can move from common issues to productive discussions of your problems." I paused to say thank you for saying that, James. It's hard for me sometimes, but I've tried to be completely honest and open. It seems like that's the only way to achieve anything. Tiffany, would you say the same for me? I watched as she squirmed and avoided looking at me. Instead, she looked at our therapist, cried and said, "That's right, Alex, I feel the same way." I wondered if James had noticed Tiffany's obvious unease. She didn't comment on it in any way, but it seemed like she looked at Tiffany for a minute or two. After the session, we walked down the street to a bakery for coffee. When she went to the women's restroom, I quickly took her phone from her purse and put it in my pocket. Then I went outside to buy a newspaper at a newsstand. And while I was there, I turned off Tiffany's phone. crumpled the newspaper, and put it at the bottom of the trash bag. I thought Victor Papa would be desperate to call Tiffany and tell her what happened. So I wanted to make sure he didn't have the opportunity to call her. At lunch, Tiffany and I talked about nothing, mostly about her shopping and what gifts we would need the next day when we went to her mum's for Christmas dinner. We made a shopping list and then went to the store chain to buy the last few things. I was surprised at my ability to stay silent, to pretend to be pleasant when all I wanted was to unmask her. But either I was a better actor than I thought, or she was too distracted to notice that something was wrong. At home, during dinner, the phone rang 3 times, and each time I jumped to answer it. The first 2 times, there was only silence. On the 3rd time, about 20 minutes later, a female voice I had never heard before asked, "Can I speak to Tiffany, please?" I wondered if Victor had asked a friend to pass a message to Tiffany and said, "Can I ask who's calling?" The voice responded, "Jenny from work." In a moment of relief, I asked, "What's it regarding?" She sounded confused. There was a moment of silence, and then she said, "Oh, that. Well, there's a project we're both working on, and I have some questions about it." On Christmas Eve, I said, "I believe she can't take the call right now, but I'll leave a message for you." "Good evening." Jenny said goodbye with a smile. Tiffany looked at me and I said, "Your co-worker called, wanted to talk about the project." Imagine, calling on Christmas Eve. It was obvious that Tiffany was a bit concerned. She waited for a few minutes and then quickly went to another room, undoubtedly to check her phone. She came back with her purse and looked worried. "Love, do you know where my phone could be? I remember taking it from the dressing room when I left this morning." "No, Tiffany, I have no idea." "Isn't it in your pocket? Did you look outside the car? Or maybe you left it somewhere today?" She searched the car, but to no avail, and I sat and smiled. In the end, she gave up, and I promised to get her a new one for New Year's. "Don't count on it, darling." I was sure her next move would be to try calling Victor if she could get out of my sight for even a few minutes. Many times during the night, I noticed Tiffany watching me out of the corner of her eye. I wondered if she was waiting for an opportunity to see the phone. In the end, she said, "Darling, I'm feeling a bit tired. I'll go upstairs to watch Netflix, okay?" "Of course, Tiffany," I replied. "Sounds great. I'll put the dishes in the dishwasher and we'll join you." She smiled at me, but I could see she was annoyed. An hour later, she asked me to check if there were any boxes on the street side. When I reminded her that tomorrow was Christmas and there wouldn't be any trash collection, she turned away with obvious disappointment. When we went to bed, she didn't have time to call anyone. On Christmas morning, I woke up early, started eating while Tiffany was still asleep, and prepared some dishes. Then I went into the bathroom and gently woke her up. "Good morning, dear." "Merry Christmas," she gave me a forced smile. "There's coffee in the kitchen." "I'm heading out. I'll see you and your parents later." She sat up oddly. "It's only 8:30 in the morning, Alex. Where are you going?" I smiled again. "Just need to grab a last-minute gift for you, dear." "But don't worry. See you there in 5 minutes. Aren't all the stores closed today?" But I was already heading to the door to kiss her. At 8:45 in the morning, I knocked on Victor Papa's door, having obtained his address from an agenda in Tiffany's office. I hoped he was in town today, as he mentioned he was looking forward to meeting her the next day. When he opened the door, he was wearing swimwear and seemed to have just woken up. A tall guy, welcoming, about 25 years old or more. "Yeah, what?" He paled when he saw me, and I ushered him inside the house. I pointed the Glock-like airsoft gun straight at his neck. It wasn't real, but he obviously didn't know that. He looked completely scared. "Let me introduce myself, Victor. I'm Alexander, Tiffany's husband and your current partner." His eyes widened, and he took another step back. "Hey buddy, calm down, okay? I don't know what you're talking about. Anyway, Victor, you called yesterday and asked me to spend the night with you. Do you really think I don't see what's going on here? Here's what's going to happen. We're going to sit down in this room and have a nice little chat. If I don't get the answers I need, I'll shoot you in the balls once or twice and leave you crying. If you decide to be more honest, after a while, we'll visit people I know and talk to them, and then I'll let you live your life. Do you understand?" He looked at me slowly and nodded slightly. "All I have to do is talk to you. Yes. And I'll leave you alone." Victor and I talked for a while, and he told me everything I wanted to know. Then I watched as he grabbed some clothes and took them to the bathroom to shower and get dressed. After that, he made us sandwiches in his kitchen, and we ate, with me pointing the gun at him the whole time. We didn't talk much, and that was fine with me. At 10:45, we went outside and got into my car. I gave Victor the address and told him to drive the car and sit in the back with a gun in his hand. When we arrived at Tiffany's parents' house, I told Victor to stop 4 doors away so they wouldn't see my car. I noticed Tiffany's car was already there, as well as her sister Barbara's car and her husband's. But I wanted to make a grand entrance, so we sat and waited until 12:30. Then I let Victor out of the car and escorted him to their front door. "No more games now, you understand, Victor?" I asked. "Remember the deal? We arrive, I give some introductory lectures, you tell your story and I leave, and you keep your testicles. If you try anything, I shoot." He looked somewhere between weirded out and scared. "Don't worry, man, I'll play it like you said." When we rang the doorbell, Tiffany's mother, Sarah, answered. Her friendly smile turned into confusion when she saw Victor. "Hi, Alex. Who's this?" "Hi, Sarah. Merry Christmas," I said, kissing her on the cheek as we entered the foyer. "This is Victor. He's just here for a few minutes." Ignoring her confusion, I took Chris by the arm and led him straight to the dining room, where the family was about to start eating. Obviously, they were starting without me. "Merry Christmas, everyone," I said with a cheerful smile, looking at their surprised faces. Tiffany said her father, Tom, her sister Barbara, her husband Mark, and their 2 sons, Teddy and Ben, were here. Tiffany was sitting a bit farther away. Everyone else had an empty but satisfied, even expectant expression on their faces. What a pleasant surprise, they thought. But Tiffany looked like a ghost. "It's Victor. He's a colleague of Tiffany's and wants to tell us a little story. Go ahead, Victor." Tiffany knelt by my feet. "No, Alex, he's not," she pleaded. I quickly interrupted her. "It's okay, honey. I think everyone should hear this." She took a few quick steps towards the door, but I grabbed her arm and held it firmly. "Come on, Victor." Tiffany tried to pull away from me, saying, No, Chris, no." I put my free hand over her mouth to silence her as her parents looked on in total surprise. Victor reluctantly began to speak. "All right, Victor. This started in April, and it's been going on since then." Tiffany's family recoiled, looking at him, then at her, and then at me. After a long pause, Barbara lifted Teddy and Ben from their chairs and ushered them into the living room, where she turned on the television and then returned to the dining room, closing the door behind her. "Go on, Victor," I smiled. "We meet at work. There are a few massage rooms in the gym with closed doors. We do it about twice a week, meeting at different times so no one would notice the pattern. We work on different floors of the building so no one would notice us leaving at the same time. There are rooms where we clean up." Tiffany continued to struggle with me. She tried to bite my hand, but I held her. "So Victor," I said, "what exactly were you two doing together? Please, be specific." "Most of the time we have sex. Sometimes Tiffany makes me feel really good to start, and she enjoys it. I enjoyed seeing the look of horror on Tiffany's mother's face." She stopped struggling against me, and I removed my hand from her mouth. She just stayed there, tears streaming down her face. And how was sleeping with Tiffany? I knew what his answer would be. She's always very proactive. She warms her feet, kisses me, especially when she's about to climax. To my surprise, Tiffany's relatives remained silent. I expected one of them to try to stop her. "She never talked about me?" I asked. "Sometimes. She said she loves you, but she won't stop sleeping with me. The only male organ I need is yours, Victor. She's told me that many times." "When are you planning to meet again?" "Tomorrow. She said she needed to work in the office. We plan to spend about 3 hours together. We hoped we'd have more time this time." "How long do you think this book will last?" he asked. "Probably a few more weeks. I'd like to continue, but Tiffany said it was time to stop. She said you insisted on going to therapy because your sex life had been severely affected, and she was worried you would find out what was going on. She said New Year's Day would be the day you'd break up with me, but then she laughed and said it might take a few weeks to finish the job." There was silence in the room. Her family looked on in shock. Tiffany, Victor, and I were all seated. Tiffany was crying, covering her face with her hands and not attempting to say anything. I went to her father, took his hand, and greeted him. "Goodbye, Tom. I loved being your son-in-law. You and Sarah are good people and deserve a better daughter than this lie." I went to Sarah, kissed her on the cheek, and said, "Goodbye, Sarah. Sorry I can't stay for lunch." It might be a little awkward. Tiffany collapsed to the floor. She was still sobbing, just sitting there with her face in her hands. I stood over her and said, "Don't come home tonight, Tiffany. By tomorrow your things will be on the garage doorstep and I'll change the locks. And don't try, I repeat, don't try to talk to me. You won't say anything I want to hear." She looked at me. "Alex, darling," I said no. Without saying another word, I returned to the table, smiling and looking at the door, hugging everyone. Victor was smart enough not to ask me for a ride home.